Energy Matters podcast. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. I am your host Kassem Alokla from Texas A&M University Society of Petroleum Engineers Student Chapter, TAMU-SPE. So today is our first Energy Matters podcast. We are here live from the Kassem, Houston, Texas, and today I'm glad to have one of the most energetic and the most well-known podcasters in the energy industry, Mr. Justin Gauthier. Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Kassem. It's an absolute pleasure. And when you reached out to ask me to do this, your kindness and your level of humbleness, it was hard to say no. But anytime I can give back to the industry, and whether that's to inform people, to educate, to just help build a community and create awareness around certain initiatives, I'm always open to doing it. And so when you reached out and asked me, it was an absolute yes. And so I'm extremely grateful and thankful that you've asked me to come on, and certainly excited to have a great conversation with you. Hopefully we do have a couple questions come in that we can talk, because I think a lot of the value in conversations around oil and gas, they happen in a roundtable format. It's a lot of Q&A. It's sort of thought leadership coming together, discussing ideas, topics. But I just think it's so important to be able to give whoever's listening an opportunity to speak up and ask questions. And so there'll be a time towards the end we can do that. But again, I'm excited to get started, and thanks again for the opportunity.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And can you bring the microphone a little bit closer to you, in front of you? Because when we publish this, there will be the audio version as well. And just want to make sure everything's tip top for everyone's listening.
Perfect. Yeah, this is my first time doing this, so I'm not used to
No, this is
okay.
For his first time, I say he's awfully calm. I don't know if he's always like this, but I'm quite impressed, man. You got a lot going on right now.
Okay, perfect. So let's first introduce the Energy Matters podcast. So this is our first time doing such type of events at TAMU-SPE, the Texas A&M University SPE student chapter. And we thought that this will be a great idea, since we are going to host many professionals from the industry like Justin, who will be joining us to give their insight about the energy industry and what are the different obstacles that we are facing right now. What are the future prediction for this energy? Are we going to go for other types of energy sources other than the oil and gas? Are we going to have this energy mix, and so on? So in addition to other stuff that are related to environment, economy, policy, and many more. So with that, we will start our podcast today with Justin Gauthier. So let me start introducing Justin. So Justin is a Canadian living the American dream. He has around 18 years of industry experience working for AES Drilling fluids in accounting management and technical sales, and is the founder of Wicked Energy, a podcast which is focused on interviewing today's top energy leaders. So Justin is a professional, is passionate about being the voice for the energy industry throughout leadership and community. His goal is to build community and create awareness around energy education to help world access reliable, abundant, and affordable energy. Justin has a master's degree in global energy management from the University of Colorado in Denver, and he is the co-owner of KTX Fit. I already know that. He ordered black coffee.
Yeah.
And he has a gym that's owned by him. So outside of his professional life, Justin enjoys spending his time with the family, golfing, creating good content, doing such high-level podcasts, and also reading and navigating other podcasts. And just a few housekeeping rules before we start. This is going to be recorded. We are now live on Zoom and LinkedIn. So the live will be later on published on our YouTube channel at Texas A&M University SPE student chapter, and also it will be published at Wicked Energy website. And if you have questions, please type them in the chat box, and then we will have Justin answering them at the end. And now let's start. So first of all, Justin, what made you interested in the oil and gas industry in general? And how did you come up with the idea of Wicked Energy podcast?
Sure. No, I mean, that's a great way to kick things off. And I don't want to, certainly bore the audience with a lengthy story about how I got into oil and gas. But the short of it is, when I was 18 years old in high school, a lot of my focus was around sports, partying, just living the social life. And I had no ambition to go back to school. And the Christmas before I graduated, I had a cousin come visit from Calgary, Alberta. And at the time, my family and I were living in British Columbia. And he continuously spoke about the industry that he was in, which was oil and gas. And at the time, he was selling wellheads for FMC Technologies. But his role, he always talked about going golfing and hanging out with, customers and going on fishing trips and going to, the Calgary Stampeders football, which is the Canadian Football League, for those who don't know. And so I said, well, John, that sounds like a great industry. Sign me up. I can do all that, no problem. And if I can get paid to do what I love doing, even better. And so he said, well, you understand that it took me about 10 years in the field to get to the point where I'm at. And I said, well, I'll do it in half the time. Watch me. And he said, well, if you're not going back to school and you want to make some good money, go to the oil field. And I said, okay, sounds good. So he, proceeded to encourage me to sign up for, it was a 2-week floor hand training course. Mm-hmm. So as soon as I graduated high school, I drove to Alberta with a good friend of mine. Neither one of us wanted to go back to school. All we wanted to do was make good money, spend money, and have fun, right? 18 years old, didn't know what I wanted to do. And that sounded like the best route to go. So anyway, fast forward, a few months going through training, applying at different drilling rig contractors, companies. I got hired on with Precision Drilling as a lease hand. And that, for anyone who's not familiar with drilling rig hierarchy, a lease hand is the lowest man on the totem pole, or lowest woman, depending, obviously. And you go and you basically start by cleaning the rigs, helping out, and really just tidying up, painting, and doing anything that anyone ever asks you to do. And that's how things kind of kicked off. Again, I grew up in British Columbia. A lot of the economy around there was driven by forestry and tourism. So oil and gas is certainly not in my blood, other than I have one cousin that did it, and he got me started on the journey. And I think it's funny because most people who start in oil and gas, or at least from my experience that I met on a drilling rig, said, I'm only going to do this for 3 years and then I'm done. And I said the same thing. And here I am, almost 20 years later, still in oil and gas. I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up, but, I got a lot of years ahead of me. So that's how it all started.
So yeah, thanks so much for sharing your story. It's really it will encourage others who are just starting their career or starting their studies to get motivated, so that they can reach, of course, everyone will reach his dream later on, but this will come with persistence, patience, and of course, working hard. Yeah. So yeah, thank you so much. And how about the Wicked Energy?
Wicked Energy. So a few years back, and this was maybe late 2017, I was very interested in opening up my own gym, and I stumbled across a podcast called Barbell Shrugged. And it was a podcast focused around helping people start building businesses in the fitness industry. And so I listened to all that. And while I was driving, because I spent a lot of time driving in account management and sales, and then working in the field as a mud engineer, it was always listening to music. Then I found podcasting, which led me to think, well, hey, there's got to be an oil and gas podcast. If I'm spending all this time driving, I might as well be absorbing as much information as possible. So I stumbled across Oil and Gas This Week, which was at the time hosted by Mark LaCour, who owns OGGN, and he's very well known in the industry, along with James Hahn. And so I listened to that for, every week for probably a year. And I just thought it was awesome that they started, I think they were one of the only ones that was using podcasting as a way to sort of build their brand, create awareness, educate, which I thought was extremely admirable. And so I said, well, I need to tie myself into this because I saw the potential, and I was also interested in starting a podcast. So started, with OGGN, podcasted with them for a while after I got connected with Mark. And then recently I decided to go off on my own. And the reason for that was I wanted to create something that I had full creative control on, the guests and the branding, and sort of build something around something that I believe that I could just use my creative control to build how I see fit. And so the Wicked, where the name comes from, is growing up in Canada, wicked is a term used to describe as cool or rad. If you say, oh, that's wicked, that's really cool, and kind of it brings like a level of energy to it. And so my wife actually, she started a holdings company for commercial real estate called Wicked Holdings. And I just thought the name was great. And so we talked about any business that her or I would create moving forward. It would be neat to tie it into the Wicked brands and eventually have a conglomerate of companies. And so that's what led into Wicked Energy. And so that's where the name came from. And a lot of folks from down, in the US or even down further south is, Wicked is kind of like, it can be taken a few different ways. It's like the Wicked Witch from the West, or, people sometimes associate the word wicked to negative, but I relate it to like an extremely positive sort of description. So that's where the Wicked name came from.
Perfect. So you are the Wicked family, right?
Yeah, we are. Yes, that's the plan.
Yeah. And talking about Mark Lauer, so he reached out to me on LinkedIn and he was like motivating me to go into this podcasting and so on. And he said like good things about you.
Oh,
and
wow.
He's going to be one of our guests later in the future.
Good. No, he's a phenomenal speaker, extremely intelligent, knows a lot about the industry. That'd be great to have him on as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they have a massive podcast content on like.
Yeah, they have a
platforms.
massive reach, right? They've been doing it for years. So again, anyone like that you can get on is extremely advantageous to your initiatives for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, perfect. So before starting with the actual talk, because I know that you have prepared some slides for us.
Yeah.
So in general and to you, what does energy matters sounds to you? Like what does it mean for you, and how important energy for us now in the 2022? How is it important for us? And if you can shed the light more in the oil and gas industry, because now the oil and gas industry, with all the competitions that's happening right now from the renewables, from the green energy, it's still present and present strongly.
Yeah.
So what makes this energy or this oil and gas industry that important and that strong till now? Is it something related to energy security, to sustainability, to other types of renewable energy? They are not stable. They are not present all the time. For example, solar energy or wind energy. So is it that this is the thing that distinguishes the oil and gas industry from others, or what are the other factors that makes this industry that important and that strong?
Yeah, no, I think that's the biggest topic of conversation around energy, and especially in oil and gas, right? Is what does the future look like for us? To kind of go back to the original question is, what does energy matters? To me, if you look around, and for everyone out there that's listening, if you just look around at whether it's the TV, the computers, you and I, this coffee, this cup, which thanks for the cup, Texas A&M-SPE, thank you so much. Everything requires energy, right? No matter what we do in life, whether it's human interaction, you and I, we require energy, which comes from what source? Food and, everything else. Everything requires energy. And the sad part about, globally, what we're seeing is that there are still, I think there's roughly around 850 million people in the world that don't have access to clean water. Out of those many people, how many do you think have access to reliable, affordable, and abundant energy? Sure. The reason we're able to sit here comfortably in air conditioning, have the lighting, have this coffee, have all this technology around us comes from the ability to access energy, to which then we can use for manufacturing goods. We can ship stuff globally. I mean, over the last 30 to 40 years, the global markets and the trades of goods has just unlocked so much opportunity for people to evolve, for businesses to flourish, for people to trade commodities. And so energy is just imperative for the advancement of human civilization as we've seen it. And going through historically the Industrial Revolution, now we're going through, I guess you could call it a technology revolution. But at the end of the day, without energy, we just wouldn't be able to do the things we're doing today. And why it matters is because for us to advance, there's everyone's trying to solve the world's problems, right? And some, your problems are different than my problems, but in general, we want to leave the planet in a better position than what it was when we arrived, right? But what I think is extremely important to note is that there's so many people without access to energy. And why does that matter? Because if we're trying to solve the world's problems, we need to tap into the world's talent. And the only way to do that is to be able to give everyone access to energy so that they can flourish and thrive. I had a conversation with a gentleman who lives in Beaumont. He's originally from Africa. And it was eye-opening to hear his experience. And because I said, What is your thoughts around energy transition? I mean, here in the US, the idea sounds great and the intent, I get it. I said, but for you, I said, coming from somewhere where, perhaps you didn't have lights on at night, maybe you didn't have the ability to heat food, what does that look like? And, he said, and it was, he said it very respectfully, but he said, trying to replace fossil fuels almost feels like we're being punished. We want fossil fuels to help get us to at least have electricity and heat and maybe air conditioning in our hospitals. I'm really not worried about the level of CO2 that my country's emitting right now because there's people who don't have access to energy.
Exactly.
That's why it matters to me.
Yeah, to me as well. Fossil fuels or crude oil means energy security. So till now, we cannot achieve this energy security with other type of energy resources. Maybe an energy mix, which like includes all of the different parts of energy, like solar, wind energy, geothermal. But of course, the oil and gas, especially the natural gas, will be like, it's a clean source of energy, but it will contribute to the largest portion of the energy mix.
Yeah.
So
no, it is. And I do want to preface by saying I am pro energy wherever that comes from. And I think it requires it all. I definitely don't want to position myself as, us against the world, because I just think that's a very limiting mentality. So again, I'm not sitting here as someone that's in oil and gas. That's like oil and gas is the answer to all. And It's the only thing that matters, because it doesn't. And so I just want to make sure that I don't ever want me to be, position myself as oil and gas and screw everything else, right? I'm an advocate for everything.
Exactly.
So, and there's a right application and a right approach to it all. So anyway, I just wanted to relay that.
Okay, sure. Perfect. So let me go and start sharing your slides. Okay, so yeah,
Nice.
do you want to start your presentation?
Yeah,
I will
and so
navigate.
one of the questions that Kassem had asked is if I could prepare a few slides just to give sort of a macro overview of where energy is at and perhaps where it's going. And I do want to, again, disclose, I am certainly not a macroeconomic analyst. I am in business development and sales for a drilling fluids company. So I don't spend, 12 hours a day researching markets. It's something that I'm interested in. Through school, I was exposed to. So I have a very, fundamental understanding of what we're discussing, but I'm not claiming to be an expert in any of this. This is just through my own research, my own interest. But I think it's important for everyone to have a good understanding of just, energy markets in general, understanding trends and where things are going. So again, please, my position is not through, I don't get paid to do market research. I do it because I enjoy it. So just want to put that out there. This is not investment advice.
Yeah, I mean, we have some students who will be like eager to know more about this, and maybe this is not covered like in most of the courses. So they will listen to an expert from the industry.
Sure.
Who will share with them like some of his insights about this. So,
Perfect. Yeah. Awesome. So yeah, again, just want to really go through some macro energy trends, and then we'll talk about, so there are some things that I can advise, or at least recommendations for students coming out of school. I've had, again, and I'm fortunate to have people reach out and ask, hey, I'm getting out of school. What do you suggest? And so I just wanted to provide that sort of at scale so that the audience could hear my thoughts on that. And then, we can get, further into the podcast. I know you've prepared some questions, and then I'm really excited for the Q&A. So that's how we're going to roll today.
Okay, great. Okay, so we can start.
Perfect. So right now, the global energy mix, I thought that was important to start there. And this came from the International Energy Outlook, published by the EIA. And it's from 2021. They publish these. It's a government agency here in the US. They publish them typically every year, sometimes every other year. I think the next one is going to be published in October of 2023. They're skipping 2022, perhaps, or unless they just didn't note it, but the next one there is going to be next year. But, in all extensive purposes, this still remains relatively accurate. So if you look on the left-hand side, we have the primary energy consumption by energy source. And if you look, every source is projected to increase, and that's in BTUs. You're not seeing a massive decline in any one of them. You see a drop off in coal for a little bit, but then it continues to ramp up. So again, when you look at this from a very high level, and again, there's other agencies out there that publish similar data. Again, I'm not hanging my hat on the EIA. All models are just models. So let's not bet the house on all of this. But even if you look at the one come out of Paris, which is the IEA, there's a lot of similarities, but I tend to, just I'm sticking with the EIA for now. So if you look at it, there's growth from all major fuels from 2030 to 2050. You're seeing renewables make up the largest growth, but even at 2050, I mean, if you look at the spread, nuclear is still there, natural gas is there heavily, petroleum and other liquids are there, coal. As much as we'd like to get away from coal, there's actually a lot of investment going into coal right now due to commodity prices. So again, according to the EIA, they're pretty bullish on everything. So I like that.
Exactly. And it's interesting that the oil and gas is still contributing to a large percentage, even in 2050. So for those who are still doubting that the energy industry is going to end in 10 years or 5 years, so this is the proof for them. It's not going to end.
Sure. It's a good indicator, right?
Exactly.
And there's a lot of things that could change. Obviously, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's like just really strict policy and regulation, but the data that we have today projects, again, a pretty strong case for everything.
Exactly.
And none of them are going away.
Exactly.
So that's my take. So yeah, you can go to the next slide.
Okay, so
the next one there. So global energy demand. So a lot of the demand we're going to see over the next few decades is coming from non-OECD countries. They're, especially in Asia and a lot of countries, they're going through some pretty good economic growth. So you're going to see a lot of energy demand coming from there until they get really efficient, to which then that may change. But again, if you look at it, the Americas is going to retain the largest share of energy consumption. And then Asia, they're looking to consume roughly 2 times that in all remaining OECD regions. So when it comes to demand, and that's what's interesting about, when you look at let's just look at oil and gas supply and demand. Supply is not, it's a function of demand. So if the demand's there, oil and gas companies are naturally going to say, oh, well, there's a demand for a product. Let's invest, let's produce, and, we'll make money. That's, very simplistically saying.
Exactly.
But we don't just produce to produce. Now, if you want to get into strategic petroleum reserves, there's a good case to produce when maybe commodities are low so that you can fill up your reserves from an energy security perspective. But no one just produces just willy-nilly without any indication of there being a demand for that product or good or whatever. So the demand is set by who? Us, consumers. So let's keep that in mind. Anytime you fill up your vehicle, anytime you go get coffee, anytime you do anything, you're consuming goods, services that require companies to produce those goods and services. And so demand is set by us, the people, not by just some arbitrary number. So I think it's important to note that. So again, energy demand, that's going to continue to increase. So liquids demand, again, that's just focusing on the liquid side. Even if you look at the low economic growth, our liquid demand, the consumption, which is demand, remains relatively flat. And so in each case, other than low economic growth, which I don't know any economies that are hoping for low economic growth. Everyone's thriving to increase their GDP.
Correct.
The demand is higher in 2050 than it was in 2020. There's a high of 64% above 2020 levels in the high growth case. That's best case scenario, along with high oil prices. But I like to think, in cases like this, it typically lies somewhere in the middle.
Exactly.
And the middle is the gradual increase in liquids demand. So again, going back to the liquid side, there's obviously plenty of opportunity there. It's not just, electricity for industrial liquids, there's a ton of demand for that as well. So again, just another strong case for production on the oil liquid side,
exactly.
Petroleum liquid side.
Correct. And this is dictated by the increase in population that we are going to witness in the near future.
Yes.
So then the demand will continue to increase for sure.
Right. Because as population increases, there's an argument that GDP increases. And there's a correlation between strong GDP and energy demand.
Exactly.
So as long as things go in that direction, we need to produce it.
Yep.
So go ahead.
No, this is the most important topic, the natural gas.
Yeah. Again, natural gas. I'm not a natural gas market analyst. All I do is, read which I feel are credible sources. And then I sort of synthesize it and draw my own conclusions. But again, going to the global natural gas, that's a hot topic. If anyone out there is interested, I interviewed a lady from Schneider Electric, and she's a gas market analyst, Christine, and I forget her last name, but it was on the OGGN Oil and Gas Onshore podcast. I'm going to have her back on. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to, just for legal reasons, really discuss the war, which really has made the biggest impact on natural gas markets. But it was interesting to hear her perspective on U.S. natural gas gas markets, LNG. So if anyone's interested to hear a little bit more in detail on that, I encourage you to go listen to that episode. I forget what number it was, but it was in the one that I was doing with OGGN. But just looking at it again, generally speaking, you're going to see an increase in natural gas production, and it's really there to satisfy key demand markets. In industry, electricity, transportation, obviously with the whole electrify, the EV movement. And for those, with all the news and everything that's happened, I'm sure everyone is aware, but US, Russia, and the Middle East are the largest natural gas exporters. And then that's going to remain through 2050. And you'll see later down in the slides with US natural gas, its sort of projection and opportunities is absolutely phenomenal. So again, globally, natural gas production is going to continue to increase. Consumption is going to increase on all, three of the major sectors there. So I'm bullish on natural gas as well.
Yep. So I have a question here, and without going into politics, and the energy industry is highly impacted by the economy, by the politics, because any political event that happens in the world will impact the oil prices all over the world. So if we want to say, in general and in simple words for students, how did the invasion of Russia to Ukraine impacted the oil prices? Because the oil prices went crazy after that invasion, and how's the sanctions on Russia impacted the natural gas in a way that will cause the United States to start looking for producing the natural gas and exporting it to the world. So do you think the United States in general will be able to supply the world with the natural gas in substitute of that was, for example, prevented from the Russian side?
Yeah. So again, I'm not an expert in geopolitics. I know a little bit about markets from, just again, through my studies and stuff. Here's my opinion.
Okay, sure.
Again, yeah, I don't want to position myself as an expert in this. There's a lot of people out there that are. But how that's impacted us is I think really what it's done is it's created a ton of awareness and exposure on how dependent we are on Russian gas, how dependent we are on goods that come out of those areas and energy that comes out of those areas, and really how a country like Russia who sits on a ton of reserves can impact global markets, which a country like Russia can use that as leverage to essentially create some economic warfare. Mm-hmm. So it's really a big chess game. And so what it's done is ultimately there's a lot of different factors that come into play here. But in general, it's made people realize that, okay, if we start playing with geopolitics, with people who have a lot of power regarding the energy that they are able to provide, places like Europe and other places that really depend on that import can really suffer. And so what does that mean? I think it means, looking at energy policy, looking at folks like the US, where, because we have so much natural gas in reserves, and we have, the Marcellus, we have the Haynesville, we have associated gas coming out of the Permian. There's so much potential for us as a country to not only help increase our national energy security, but help other countries as well. In which we're always, it's funny, growing up in Canada, you always look at the US as anytime there's any geopolitics happening, somehow the president is there shaking hands, or in this case, fist bumping, which is hilarious. But, so we, again, if we play our cards right, I think we can not only help ourselves and generations to come, we can also help many other countries, and which is great, right? So again, and I forget some part of the other questions, but again, I simply just, I read the news, and get oil and gas articles. With natural gas prices the way they are, especially in Europe, countries like Germany and just that part of the world, it's sad because if Putin decides to stop selling oil to the West, and then we have to continue draining our strategic petroleum reserves, and now I'm talking more oil, but ultimately, it gives them a lot of power. And so what has the war done is it's really exposed and hopefully put people that do have influence over energy policy here in the US, hopefully it's allowed them to sort of reevaluate and change the course of action. And maybe even as investors, perhaps the investor community say, hey, now is an opportunity for us to, step up, and instead of completely divesting away from oil and gas, perhaps now there's more opportunity on the gas side because, hey, if they continue to play their game in Russia, and all of a sudden, let's just say some allies get created between Russia and say Saudi and China, well, that could then impact global markets. And at the end of the day, if energy prices get to a point where they're too high because of people playing this power game, well, then their lives are at stake, right? And at the end of the day, it's about human civilization. And if because of what they're doing impacts people's lives and, okay, now you can't afford electricity to where then you have to go live on the streets, like that's not advancing human civilization. That's just creating warfare. And it's sad, right? So again, hopefully I answered the question. Yeah, very high level. So if you want to talk about drilling fluids, I can get way more in the weeds, but that's my take.
I already took a lot of lectures in drilling fluids. Thank you so much.
Okay, yeah, good.
So yeah, but getting back to the natural gas, I was reading 2 days ago that Germany itself is now like having this type of like contract or something between the government and EQT, which is considered the largest producer of natural gas here in the United States, so that they can start like providing them with natural gas, which seems really interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, as you mentioned, like we cannot leave the whole world like without any source of energy. So the United States will provide what it can in terms like of its share or its like percentage of oil and gas, especially natural gas, which is highly needed right now.
Right.
Okay. And yeah, let's go to the next slide.
All right. So from an energy investment standpoint, this came from McKinsey's Global Energy Perspective. They publish this every year. So, and everything I'm showing here is free to public. None of this is paid, which is why I also wanted to provide this, is because everyone out there can access this type of information. So energy investment, it's funny because if you look at oil and gas energy investments, if I would have had more time, I would have put the numbers up. But like over time, especially through the pandemic, investments into our industry, and I say ours, oil and gas, was very depressed, right? So what happened was there was a lot of divestment from a lot of institutional investors, private investors. Really just the money flowed towards, hey, let's, focus on the energy transition, which again, wherever side of the fence you sit on, that's the reality of it. But when you look at over time, the CAGR, compounded annual growth rate, you're seeing a good increase over time on all sectors. Yes, oil is at -1%, but I think if you in a model that extends out to 2035, 1%, with a margin of error in there, it could be, that could have been 2%, it could have been 1%. But ultimately you're seeing growth in all of them to meet the energy transition. And then too, with renewable energy investments, I think a lot of that is highly dependent on policy and regulations and how they get implemented. I mean, it could depend on, who the next president is, or, depending on if all of a sudden China wants to, get real strict on their energy policy and then their, renewable energy investments, which they are. They're, generally speaking, more countries and economies are driving towards energy transition. But when you look just at oil and gas, you see 70% of oil and gas investments remain in North America, the Middle East, and in Africa. Which is also right. So, which is us. And so if you're here in the US, plenty of opportunity. The Middle East, obviously there's a ton of opportunity over there. And what I think you're going to see eventually, again, this is just my gut, I have no data to support this, but I think what you're going to see is a lot of folks in the Middle East try to look at talent, technology, and I think they already do to some degree. But for those out there who are young and eager and are willing to travel, and I say young because I'm just speaking in generalities, maybe you don't have kids, you're not tied down to, being somewheres, but when you're in a position to be able to travel, I think getting overseas experience is so valuable, not only from just industry experience, but understanding how to work with different cultures. That's one thing. Again, even though Canada and the US are very similar in many ways, the way we conduct business is, and the way we communicate is even pretty considerably different in some levels. But to have more, I guess, sort of culturally diverse experience when dealing with people, if you have an opportunity to go overseas, I just think it's so valuable. And the experience and the traveling you get to also do is super cool. And then Africa, I mean, there's a lot of, I say a lot, it's relative, but it seems to be that there's more activity and attention being put into Africa. I interviewed a gentleman from Recon Africa is the company, but they were going over there and I think they drilled their first well last October. But, that was really interesting to hear. I guess they identified a large reservoir or a large play over there that from the data that he had said it was going to be like the second Eagleford of the era. So again, there's more attention being drawn to other places like that, which I don't know. I think that'd be pretty cool to go to Africa and drill some wells or, depending on what your discipline is. So again, there's lots of opportunity. It's not like you have to stick in one. You don't have to go to Midland for the next 10 years to have a job. There's plenty of opportunity everywhere else.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this drives me to the next question. Talking about investment, in your opinion, do you think it's important to invest right now in research and development that's related to the renewables, or research and development that will enhance the exploitation, production, and exploration of the existing oil and gas resources that we currently have? So based on your opinion, which do you think is more important right now, to focus on the oil and gas R&D, or to explore new resources that are green and that falls under the energy transition umbrella?
No, I get your question. And there's a lot to unpack there. And again, I'm certainly not in the investment world, but just from my opinion, I think it really depends on what your objective is as an investor, right? Some people want quick returns. Some people want, a ton of, equity multiple. Some are okay with putting their money in something that yields a lot less than, say, an oil and gas project, but in the next 20 years, they know it's going to remain somewhat steady. So I guess the best answer, and this is what I learned in school, the best answer you can always give someone is it depends, right? So again, but in general, I think it's important to invest heavily in the technology side. I'm going to just speak on oil and gas. I know I wrote a paper, in school, and I talked about business objectives for European major energy companies, i.e. BP, Shell, and then comparing it to Chevron, Exxon. And so the strategy there is so different, and their investors want something completely different. So I can't sit here as a podcaster and say, this is where all the money needs to go. Like, that would just be silly for me to say. But what I can say is in oil and gas is, I think there's plenty of opportunity to still invest in oil and gas. And I think that if we as an industry want to continue to advance and get to a position where we have money to be able to attract talent and build companies and make them attractive, just from a talent acquisition perspective, there's not too many people graduating high school that, want to get into oil and gas. A lot of the professionals that I work with in my industry, I ask them, are you wanting your kids to get into oil and gas? And 9 out of 10 times they say, no, I don't want them to get into oil and gas. Why? Everyone has their own reasons, but that's kind of sad to hear that, right? Like, you would think that if you're proud of the industry that you've committed to and that's helped support your family, wouldn't you want your kids to follow in your footsteps? Assuming they want to. If they don't, if they want to be underwater basket weavers, cool, I support that too. But you shouldn't be like, oh no, honey, don't get into oil and gas because that industry is, going by the wayside. I mean, that's a challenging conversation to have, and it's very complex. Everything we're talking about is extremely complex, and no one has all the answers.
Exactly.
But I think without proper investment from oil and gas, it's going to be tough for us, I say us as the US, to efficiently produce enough to meet market demands. And if we don't, guess who will? Everyone else. Not Canada, because they're being limited on what they can do, due to policy and in government. And so if we take away our opportunity, North America and countries who really develop it in the best manner, the safest, the most sustainable, then there's countries who are going to do it to take advantage, and they're going to laugh at us and say, it's too bad you guys didn't invest in yourselves. Now we're going to, but oh, guess what? We're going to cut corners. We're going to, we're not going to worry about emissions. And then what happens? Then you're back to, okay, well, yeah, it's great we're not polluting in the US, but now we're just shifting pollution to other parts of the world. Well, guess what? If you pee in a pool in that corner, that kid over there is going to get pee on his leg. So it doesn't matter. Exactly. You know what I mean? So it's just trying to kind of think through that, I think, is extremely important.
Yep. Yeah, that's really true. And I think it's important to invest in both and try to show the world that the oil and gas industry can help reduce emissions. For example, the hydrogen storage, which can be stored underground in depleted oil and gas reservoirs. Also, for example, the CCUS, the carbon sequestration, is really important topic right now, where we can use the already existing reservoirs in order to trap and keep the emissions, and this will help the environment, and at the same time it will beautify the look of oil and gas industry to others, right?
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. So getting into the U.S. crude oil production, I'm not sure how many of the listeners are here in the U.S. I am assuming most. But if you look at crude oil production, again, unless there's low oil price and low oil and gas supply, you're going to see low oil production, which naturally speaking. So It suspects that it'll return to pre-pandemic levels in 2023. And there's assumptions or, based off forecasts and models that in 2028, you're going to see a peak in production, but then it remains relatively consistent through 2050. And then if you look at Brent crude oil prices, it's all over the map. I won't even try to predict that, because if I did, I certainly wouldn't be a podcaster. So, but again, the takeaway here is that in the US, you're going to see continued oil production. And even if, you look at decline rates, right? Like even to maintain production, keep in mind that all these tight oil reservoirs and all this unconventionals that we're drilling, their declines are so fast. So you have to constantly be drilling new wells to keep that production up. So it's not like, you're going to have 2,000 barrels a day from every well you punch in the hole from now until 10 years from now. So like unconventionals are a very interesting, I guess, model, because you get a bunch of production, then it drops off. You get a bunch of it. So you're constantly on the treadmill trying to, punch new holes, get that initial production, even just to maintain production. Even if we said, well, no, like demand's peaked and well, now we can stop drilling. No, you still need to drill new wells. So that's kind of a takeaway from there.
Okay. Also, like investment in recompletion, because this is a very hot topic right now, especially in the shales. So refracturing is something really important right now for the existing.
Yeah, completion technology. I think talking about investments, I think it would benefit the industry tremendously to have a lot of money flow into the understanding, geomechanics, subsurface completions, and maximizing the amount of production you can get from one well. Very interesting. Yeah,
exactly.
Natural gas, again, same thing. You look at production increasing. Globally, you're seeing an increase in demand for gas. Gas exports also going to continue to increase here in the US. There's a ton of new LNG export facilities under construction. LNG is a fascinating market. Again, I'm not an expert in it by any means, but if we can sort of help supply the world with natural gas because we have so much of it, the economics make sense. However, keep in mind, these things you can't just open a valve and all of a sudden start pumping natural gas to Europe. These are billion-dollar facilities that take a long time to construct. There's a lot of, the amount of money, just the capital to get going, and then it requires contracts from other countries. So this is, again, very complex. Nothing happens fast. So yeah, from an investment perspective, it's like, okay, what does the future of LNG look like? And so I'm sure there's a lot of conversations being had with people who have way more money than I'll probably ever have, talking about whether or not they should dump billions of dollars into LNG facilities. Because what if all of a sudden we do transition and, we don't need natural gas anymore? Well, then there's gonna be a ton of people without it not making any money. So those are some huge risks and big decisions that people have to make, is like, do we want to ramp up LNG export capacity? If so, you better hope that there's someone that wants to buy your gas, because if not, it's gonna be tough.
Exactly.
So yeah. But looking at it, if gas demand goes up, then you got a case.
Yeah, that's true. Okay.
All right. And then, so production, consumption,
continuing
up and to the right. That's what we want, right?
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So let's get to the important part for the students. So as a takeaway from this, like talk about the oil and gas industry, and if you are now, let's assume that you are back to your freshman year and you are on the position to choose your major, will you go for petroleum engineering again or no? And what are your advices for the aspiring petroleum engineers or energy engineers that are currently studying or that will join the industry very soon? So some advices, tips.
Yeah, I think, I want to give the most value as possible. So yes, I think there's going to be a demand for petroleum engineering. I think that, again, I don't know the numbers, but it would be interesting to look at the research and like how many petroleum engineers, like what the demand is for petroleum engineers. I know right now a lot of it's like data scientists, perhaps geomechanics. But yes, I think if you have a good work ethic and a level of discipline and willingness to learn and travel, the demand for petroleum engineers are going to be there. And guess what? If it's like anything, it's supply and demand. If there's a demand for a certain discipline and there's only a few people that actually have that degree, well, guess what? You're going to have a higher probability of getting a job. You may have a little more leverage to negotiate, your salary and time. But I wouldn't discourage someone from going into petroleum engineering. It's like anything, understand the risks, do your own research, and be willing to accept that if you graduate and no one's hiring because of market conditions, don't worry. Like engineering is such a, you can use that degree in so many different areas. Just because you don't get hired on at ConocoPhillips as a petroleum engineer. It doesn't mean that there's no other petroleum engineering jobs. There's a ton out there. There's a ton of, energy technology companies that are hiring petroleum engineers. There's a lot of, oil field service companies are hiring petroleum engineers. The company that I work for, we've actually hired, over the years, way more petroleum engineers than what we did. Like now we're hiring more degreed engineers because there's quite a few coming out of school that are willing to come work for an oil field service company. Whereas for a long time, it was like, well, if I don't get hired on at Exxon, then I don't know where my career is going to go. But the reality is there's so many different opportunities out there. And so I think coming back to advice, if there's one thing that I would do in college, aside from making sure I graduate with, is I would be networking and building my reputation and brand as much as if I wasn't studying, I would be on LinkedIn. I'd be going to different events. I would be shaking hands with so many people. The ones that I've seen over the last few years do that are now excelling and they're getting opportunities. Whereas some of the students that, kind of sat back and just thought, hey, maybe I'll graduate and like there'll be a bunch of companies coming to look for me. Like that's just not the reality. So what I would say is, and it's cliche to say it, but I would network as much as humanly possible. Our industry is still very much focused on the human interaction, the relationships, and be willing to work for free. And I know that sounds silly, but if there's a company or somebody out there that you either you idolize or you see as like, wow, they're an energy role model, or I would love to do what they do one day, reach out and say, what can I do for you? Or even think of things like, hey, I noticed you work in, I don't know, let's say you're a reservoir engineer. Hey, I would love to do a little extra research on the side to help you. What could I work on? Like that would go a long way. So put yourself out there and be willing to do that. Have a purpose for why you're getting into the oil and gas industry. I got in it arguably for the wrong reasons. I got into oil and gas because I wanted to make as much money as humanly possible. Okay, I've been very fortunate financially. Now I have to refine my purpose, which I believe I've found. But if you're getting into oil and gas for the money, sorry to tell you that those days of people making way more money in oil and gas than any other industry are long gone. Okay. The job that you get in there, fight for happiness, creativity, risk taking, and failure. If companies don't embrace that mentality, don't work there. And again, if you need it to put food on your plate, yes, but look very strongly at other companies, talk to your peers, network with people, because companies that embrace those elements are the ones that are going to succeed and attract talent. You don't want to be at a place where you get put in a box, you're not allowed to make decisions. And if you're not happy within your company or organization, it's not worth the time and the headache. I can promise you. Again, don't solely focus on working for an oil and gas operator, an E&P, someone who drills and
Exactly.
Oil field services. There's hundreds of them who are thirsty for young, eager kids getting out of school that want to learn and that are willing to do whatever it takes to succeed. And then energy technology. I know a lot of folks that, and even looking at your LinkedIn, you've gotten certification in different things. I think like data science and everything. The more skills that you develop, the more marketable you're going to be. And if you're interested in the technology space, which arguably a lot of students are now, there's a ton of opportunity there. So if you apply your engineering skills with tech, the opportunities are endless. Consider other energy verticals. You have in oil and gas, upstream, midstream, downstream, which the market for that is
Huge.
infinite almost.
Exactly.
So there's so many, and then other things like geothermal, a lot of the same engineering fundamentals and just, ultimately producing, like drilling holes in the ground, completing them. And a lot of that is very similar to oil and gas.
Same skills.
Yeah, there's a lot of skills. And I've seen a lot of folks transition from oil and gas into geothermal. And, they invite and they embrace it with open arms, which I think is fascinating. And then even offshore wind. If you get a lot of offshore experience, which right now is not very busy, but now there's a lot of offshore engineering opportunities to go work in offshore wind, because a lot of what, I would say experts working in the water typically come from oil and gas. So that's kind of an interesting transition you're seeing too. I'm not a financial advisor, but please, if this is one thing students can take away from this, oil and gas is cyclical. You will go to a point in your career where you will make a certain amount of money that you thought was better than you would have ever made. That could get cut in half within 6 months. So please, if you get into a position where you're in a nice cycle where oil and gas activity is strong, you're making good money, bonuses, stock, whatever the case is, do not live above your financial means, because I've seen a lot of people get out of school, make good money. They hit the market right, thinking that's the way it was going to be. They overextended themselves. They leveraged themselves. They took on a bunch of consumer debt. Oh, now I'm screwed because the market's down. I'm living, way beyond my means. And then they're forced to take jobs that they don't want, maybe multiple jobs. But if you can understand, like, live below your means, because what that's going to do is it's not going to basically handcuff you when times are bad. Again, I'm not a financial advisor, but just for the students out there, please know that, like, my salary has fluctuated drastically over the course of my career, and it's not a linear, increase. That you're going to go through periods of ups and downs, and with the amount of volatility that there is in our space right now, I mean, if you're making good money, be very careful with it. I think that's extremely important, because that can set you up for a long life of financial, challenges. Exactly. Unless you're a trust fund baby, then have at it.
Yeah, this is really important too.
Yeah, no, I'm very passionate about that. My wife is big into financial literacy, and so that's something in our household we talk about a lot. And then patience. Be patient. You're not going to get the, $250,000 job right out of school. Be patient, enjoy the opportunities, be willing to eat dirt for a little while just to get yourself exposed to things that are going to build your skill set, to which then is going to lead to better opportunities. Patience, patience, patience. I'm 36 years old. I've been in the industry for 18 years. I've got arguably another 30 left. Like, I'm planning to live to at least 100, and I'm not going to stop in doing what I enjoy doing. And so I feel like I'm just getting started. You know what I mean? And to be in my 20s and be like, have a white canvas of opportunity is absolutely amazing. So don't get to, like, I didn't get a job right out of college. It took me over a year to get a job. And so I delivered furniture with, 3 years of roughnecking experience, my petroleum engineering technology degree. I thought I was going to graduate and there's going to be a bunch of people handing me offer letters. No, I graduated and then sat in a moving truck to go deliver furniture. So it didn't matter, because the outcome was great, but Exactly. Be patient. If you don't get your dream job, don't get discouraged. Continue to network, continue to reach out to people, offer value to people who you think, make sense building strategic relationships with. And good things will happen, but patience, patience, patience.
Yeah, this is really important. It's all about passion and patience. Both of them, when they exist, this will lead you to achieve all of your goals and dreams. But all of these tips are really important and very critical. But I guess you missed one thing, which is to be an SPE member.
So, yes.
So
thank you.
We at TAMU-SPE, we really encourage and motivate our students to network with people. We equip them with all the skills, the technical skills, all the ways that will allow them to join the industry as a very good candidate for a future job that will make them very distinguished in this company and in this career. So I think SPE, the Society of Petroleum Engineers, is really doing a great job in equipping the students and the future generation with all the trends that are happening in the industry, making them really meeting all the standards or all the requirements of the companies when they graduate after school.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. And that's a failure on my part. And I've given that recommendation in the past. Is there are so many phenomenal organizations like SPE, like AEDE, IEDC. I mean, you name it. There's at least 50 of them just here in Houston. If you can join as a student, you probably get discounts, or you're able to be a member for free.
Yep.
Sign up for all of them. And you may not be able to do all the events, but if you at least are a member and you may be getting some emails on just different things that are happening in the industry, the ultimate goal is to increase the surface area for opportunity to land on. And by you applying and being part of these organizations and being part of your community, you're doing a phenomenal job at that. You should pat yourself on the back, because you're going to have so much opportunity down the line because of who you're meeting and what you're doing. And so for everyone out there, take a play out of Kassem's playbook here, because he's doing it right. And yes, the more organizations you can be a part of, and not only oil and gas, be part of energy ones. Be part of a clean energy organization. Don't put yourself in a box.
Exactly.
Expose yourself to everything, and the world will unlock for you.
Sure. And I guess this is the end. So I just want to see if we have some questions from the audience before ending this talk, which I'm really
Well, this was great. I don't know if everyone was able to hang on. I know an hour of us babbling here may have been long, but yeah, if there's no questions, cool. If there is, even better.
There should be at least one question from the audience. Let's see. We have 17 people. That's great.
So is that including my mom? Because I thought she'd be the only one.
Your mom, your wife, and your kids.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, the participants, any one of you have a question? I guess Dr. Blessing Game has a question for you.
Is that the red devil I see?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
This is totally different from his character. Like he's an angel, but he's trying to
He's rebelling. Okay, I like that. Yeah.
I think probably be a good idea to see if a student has a question about, starting at the bottom and working through. I enjoyed the parts about making career decisions that focus on managing your money and managing your opportunities. I think that's really important, regardless of what you do with your career.
Yeah.
Does anyone have a question or a comment about that? I mean, we've sold our discipline for so long on it being proportional, your pay proportional to your labor. Some people thought it was disproportional, but then when they got into it, they realized that you work a hell of a lot more than you think you do to earn that money. I think that was really good messaging, and I also think that, the guidance on making sure you know that it's a cyclical industry is realistic. Right now, it's sort of in limbo. You say this is probably oscillatory because we're facing something that's due to an external cause, not an economic cause per se. I would prefer for us to be in a more stable economic situation with maybe $80, $85 a barrel rather than $100 a barrel, whatever it is today, 96. And then bounce up to 150 and then bounce down to 50. I don't want to see that.
Right.
We've seen that in our careers.
No, that's a very good input there. And, maybe while the audience is thinking of a question, the level of volatility and the frequency at which we're seeing these swings is something like we've never seen. And if you go on to whether it's the EIA's website or anything that tracks, Brent prices or WTI prices over time, it's very interesting to see. And so in saying that, yeah, you kind of have to be prepared. And typically you could look at, the fundamentals of supply and demand and kind of have a good idea of things where they're headed. But right now you just simply don't. And the market is so quick to make knee-jerk reactions off a single data point to where, and I mean, I saw this morning that the World Health Organization is saying that the monkeypox is like a global emergency or something to that effect. And who knows, could that put us in a position where all of a sudden there's demand destruction because the world sentiment is that monkeypox is going to be another COVID? I'm not saying it is, but you just never know what can happen. So that level of volatility is crazy, which is why it's making a lot of the investors kind of weary of where they want to put their money just because of how volatile it is. So again, kind of coming back to as a student, live within your means, and just because you get a nice little bonus, don't go spend it right away because you may need it in 6 months.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, actually we are getting a lot of questions on LinkedIn and here one on Zoom. So Courtney is asking a question. Let me get to her. So how would you recommend that we as college students most effectively take the advantage of the industry networking opportunities? How would you recommend that we maximize this opportunity so that we can...
of where we're at right now?
In general, networking with the professionals.
Maximizing the opportunity is be willing to go above and beyond. That was all kind of my motto growing up. My dad always said, it's funny how lucky you get when you work hard. So it kind of comes back to, if you have an opportunity, seize the opportunity and maximize your ability to capitalize on that stuff. And I guess that's very generic, but what I would say is, if you have an opportunity, always give more than what's expected. And that's one thing that I've always tried to do in my career. And you may not be able to do it on every single task, but always and one thing too is how you do one thing is how you do everything. And so I grew up playing sports, and my coaches always said, it's not what you do during game time, it's what you do off the court. So, and I say that to say, when you're, in the trenches working, whether it's in the field, in the office, day to day, you're doing what you have to do to, and initially you're not necessarily paid off your crystallized experience. It's a lot of fluid experience. You're sort of gaining a lot of skills, this and that, but you're paid to kind of be the grunt. You know what I mean? And depending, again, it's very relative. I'm just speaking in general terms here, but when you have the opportunity to kind of go above and beyond and dive deeper into things that may interest you, that goes a long ways. And so if you're, let's say someone says, hey, can you put together this report? Or, hey, take a look at this data set and, make some graphs, this and that. Always do a little bit more than what's expected, because I tell you what, if you go the extra mile, traffic is usually not that busy. And if you can set yourself apart because you worked a little harder and maybe a few extra hours, it's well worth it. And so for me now, as I'm married, 2 kids, the days where I could just stay at the office till 8 or 9 at night and not have to answer any phone calls as to why I'm not coming home to put my kids to bed, I don't get that much anymore. So, but what I did in my early, in my 20s is I took a ton of risk. I drank from as much fire hose water as I could. I went all out and I didn't take my foot off the gas. And I think that's a perfect time to do it, because as you get older, the reality is you don't have the bandwidth, you don't have the capacity, and you get to a point where you have other life factors that take away your time. You're liable for, whether it's being a father, being a husband, perhaps who knows, you're a coach of your kid's softball team, like whatever that looks like. Again, I don't want to say like kill yourself working in your 20s, but work hard, party hard, network hard, do everything full tilt. And that's kind of my motto until you're kind of forced to slow down a little bit. But yeah, put your foot on the gas and just see what the world can offer you and what you can offer to the world. Yeah,
that's true. Since we reached the end of this, I just want to take one more question from LinkedIn, since
we have the room till I'm okay to keep going depending on you.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so let's take the
questions. Let's try to get as many as we can.
Okay.
I'll try to keep my answers shorter. Sorry, I like to babble a little bit. It's the podcaster in me, I guess.
Yeah, no worries. So Carlos is asking, would you say that unconventionals is the best way to go in petroleum engineering in the United States?
I think right now that's where the demand is, but I would not discourage someone from going into the conventional space. I think it depends on commodity prices, but I think if you're in a position where you can get exposed to like EOR, enhanced oil recovery, something that requires a little bit more kind of unique discipline, because what unconventionals does is it's commoditized our industry. And by that, I mean, there's not really new technology. It's not really, hey, let's go explore and like really do true engineering. And no disrespect to my engineering peers, but the reality is like to be an engineer in unconventionals isn't quite as complex as say doing engineering on well interventions offshore. So if you get an opportunity to do something outside of unconventionals, I would say if you're interested in it, I would go for it, because again, we're cyclical. All this conventional stuff that we did back in the day, some offshore work, some of these unique exploration type, projects that took place, that may all come back. And if you can position yourself as an expert in something that's kind of niche while still making sure you're tied into what's going on, at the time right now, unconventionals, then I think that really sets yourself apart. We have some guys in our office that are like experts in reservoir drilling fluids, and they understand open hole completions. There's not too many people around anymore that understand open hole completions and how to like properly deploy, screens in a conventional well or, on the completion side. So, but now they use those skills and apply them to certain things, in the unconventional world. So again, unconventionals is cool, and it kind of has that sex appeal because you're just, blowing and going and you're drilling wells and you're, but if you have an opportunity to get on a project or get involved with stuff that's not on the unconventional stuff, I would highly do it. Like, why not? You know what I mean? It's not like you're missing out. Unconventionals is always going to be there. And so, but a great question. Thanks, Carlos. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Another question. Why is the public going for oil and gas when coal seems to be the most harmful? Why not invest more into natural gas rather than coal?
Because it's, with commodity prices. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of it comes down to just the market fundamentals of like when natural gas got really expensive, which it still is, relatively speaking, people wanted to invest in coal because it's kind of the cheaper option. And so the question is, why are we not investing more in natural gas?
Why we're not investing in natural gas instead of coal?
Instead of coal. Yep. Well, that's a good question. I don't really have a good answer. I think Google search and perhaps maybe reading some publications might be good. I mean, coal has been around for so long, and the energy density that coal has is far greater than most. And so from like just purely a power generation perspective, it offers the best bang for your buck. And then two, it really depends on where you're at globally, right? Like if you have access to good coal and you still have coal plants that are not decommissioned, you might as well use those. And if you've got decent access to coal and you can import it for cheap, I mean, at the end of the day, people are going to, depending on where you're at, you're going to go for the cheapest, most reliable, source of energy, unless you're being subsidized somehow. But it's a good question. I wish I had a better answer, but just at the end of the day, a lot of it just comes down to the economics.
Exactly. Yep.
And so natural gas with prices being so high, a lot of times you see people go from natural gas back to coal. And when natural gas is cheap, people fire up their natural gas plants or use more of it. So that's kind of an answer.
Also the demand, for example, for natural gas, as you mentioned, sometimes like we don't need this natural gas, so we go for flaring, for example.
Right.
Yep.
Yes. No, a lot of, again, comes back to supply and demand too.
Exactly.
But that's a good question. I would like to do some more research on that one.
Okay, perfect. So I think with that, we come to an end for this
Sweet.
nice and light and simple and really interesting talk.
No, I'm
Thank
glad. And thanks for all the listeners out there. I think it was, if anything, hopefully it sparked some curiosity to look at other, just look down different avenues in whether it be oil and gas or energy. I encourage anyone to reach out. If there was a question you had or that you think about, please reach out to me. I love nothing more than to give back to students and anyone out there for that matter. I like to try and give everyone time if I have it. And, if you have any questions on just whatever we talked about today, and if there's an opportunity for me to come back and do this in person and maybe touch on something more specific to my discipline, or even
Drilling
if we want to have, drilling fluids, cool, drilling operations, I can talk about, a full swing of things, whether it be networking, branding, sales, business development, anything that you need. I'm here to help support you and the rest of your peers and organizations. So I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate it having you with us on this Saturday. This is a really important topic, and hopefully we will bring you more interesting topics that might be like of your interest. This is really like the energy industry is full of trending and new topics every day. You get something really new, and so in order to keep track of these changes in the energy industry, I think it's very important to conduct such type of events, especially podcasts, where you can reach to everyone and all over the world. And that's what Justin is doing with his podcast. Like he's interviewing, or he's like hosting people from the industry, from different companies, different levels in their profession. And this is really important. And of course, please follow him on LinkedIn, connect with him on LinkedIn, and go to his podcast's website, Wicked Energy. It's really important, and it's really nice, organized, so you can get the benefit from all of the previously recorded podcasts, and hopefully this is going to be one of them. And as you mentioned, we will have you in the future as well.
I would love to.
And it's going to be on campus.
I'd love to shake hands and meet some of the fellow students. And if you have any ideas or topics or even people that you'd like me to interview on the podcast, again, I'm very fortunate to have a pretty wide reach, and I'm connected to a lot of different folks. So if anything interests you beyond what we talked about today, let me know, and connect with me on LinkedIn, say hi. And if you're in Houston, let's grab a coffee. I love going for coffees or lunch.
Black coffee.
Anything I can do to hang out. So again, thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much.